fairest do we die in this battle.
My time not come yet. Not sure about yours.
That's comforting.
All right. Look, you got a haircut. I like the hat too. It's kind of different.
Yeah, it's not bad. It kind of goes with the green and the white. This is my old, I used to have a radio show years ago. This is the old radio station hat.
That's cool. Well, where was the radio station show? Like how did that work?
Just here in town. When I moved to this town in Ontario, I thought, how am I going to get to know the town? And so I
I'll be a radio station. That's great. Did it work? Like, did you end up meeting a lot of people? And
yeah, I did. And it was interesting because it's tied in with the university. So I got to meet a lot of those people. And
wow.
A lot of it was just psychological because you think, okay, I'm communicating to the entire anonymous community here. Whether I'm getting to know them or not, I'm taking the risk of presenting myself to them.
Oh yeah, you're definitely creating a presence of yourself in the environment in a really cool way. I remember you talking to John once about radio hosting. So I do remember you mentioning something like that when you guys were talking about like podcasting and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was fun. I grew up on the Canadian National Radio, so it was also sort of like fulfilling a childhood curiosity.
Oh no, I loved college radio. Like I love punk rock music, which was like on college radio, and they'd play like weird. We actually have a pretty good kind of NPR-ish local radio station that would play, that still probably does play all sorts of just creative, eclectic, quality things. You're like, oh, I would have never get exposed to all these different viewpoints and types of art if not for the radio. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. When I was in high school, like late night university radio is where I got most of my music. And my friends were always appalled because they'd never heard of a single band I was listening to.
Yeah, we're both old enough. It's weird. They're like finding weird music used to be hard and made you interesting. And there's like little record stores that used to, I'm sure they're gone now, but that I used to love to go to and get the fifth B-side of a Nine Inch Nails CD I'd never heard of, or some weird, just that whole underground of music that was, there's so much good music in the world. And so the bandwidth on the radio is such a small fraction. And then at the same time, going into like a local bar or whatever can be just horrible. You can waste so much time trying to find it. So the curated kind of radio is kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, I wasted a lot of time trying to find music.
Yeah, and now it's the opposite. We have all the music, and I never know what is popular anymore.
No, and it's not systematic like it used to be. Like, here's the top 40, and then here's the alternative music, and then you're on your own. But now it's like, hey, if you like Billie Eilish, you might like bluegrass, and you're like, what? How did the algorithm make that connection?
They're pretty bad. I used to have to subscribe to Pandora, Spotify, and Google just because I could kind of get a feel for the way the algorithms were better or worse and wanted more variety usually without that like feeling you were just talking about. That's it. We're in the small world network. We were in the nice tight coupled network that had all the top 40s and all of the things you would like, and you could small talk about those almost spontaneously. And now we're in the long tail of the world, and there's no cohesion in some ways in that. Like,
it's a whole different set of skills to be part of this new one. But I think ultimately it's richer because like the tentacles go in more directions and find more things.
Right. Yeah. There's way more and small world networks are better because they have more interesting information, maybe like they just reach more, like you're saying, and they allow for more novelty because it doesn't have to stay at the top, and you don't have to become Bad Religion to be a good punk rock band. And you could like, it's kind of cool that people can just have like 2,000 Patreons giving $1 each and not ever need to aspire to like get into the mainstream or whatever.
Swarm culture.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, sweet. Well, it's good to see you. I also watched your retreat video. It sounded like that was pretty fun and recharging, you said.
We had a real the vibe was so nice that now the concern is, well, how do we do that again or do it more? Or, you know, if we're going to Austin, how do we make sure it happens there or figure out why it didn't happen there? Or it's like we have a standard now to judge it by.
Yeah. No, it's getting insight into the process without getting too caught up on like an idealized outcome. Have you ever read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a passage in there I used to read a lot, and it would talk about over idealizing and how it's easy to start having expectations with your practice.
Yeah.
And that's not good either.
No, there's a real sweet spot in there, especially when it comes to inner practice, because you don't want to sabotage it with goal setting and idealized fixations. But at the same time, you don't want to just practice pointlessly. You do want to evaluate your practice to see if it's giving you these successes or not.
Right. You desire something, but if you get too caught up on what's happening, you can really sabotage it.
Yeah. To what degree do you have to let go of your goals in order to achieve your goals?
Intrinsic motivation is awesome and such like it's so devalued. It's all like quantifiable, measurable. What have you done for me lately? And you end up getting too stagnant, like a stagnant pond or something, if you don't go like, what's in there? What if I want to spend more than the optimal amount on dinner or whatever, or eat at the technically perfect place?
Well, that might be quantifiable before too long.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, as computers get more and more sophisticated, the ability for them to like understand properties and relationships and kind of map that. It is weird that we could be in a time where like a lot of mysteries could be solved.
If the algorithm can quantify and maximize for intrinsic motivation, that's a better civilization than the one we've been living in.
Right. If you have a good system, it's like a lovely overlord or something like that.
At least an overlord who actually knows what we are and what's going on inside of us would be nice.
Yeah, and factor analysis, like our brain factor analyzes pretty well, but like computers, especially when I think we talked about this before, when they team up with experts, they do it better. They're just able to see more patterns, and then the experts can balance their like naivete into human nature with their sophistication for just seeing more number relationships than we have. And yeah, like I think that, just to keep it on the music for a second, like I think the music algorithms are better for people that are maybe like high in openness. Like I don't know if both of us are. So just like I want more variety in what I want. So they're just getting slowly until they get wrong.
I'm waiting for the algorithm to be able to provide me with pleasant surprises. Like I want an affect that I haven't had before. Give me that.
Well, that's the problem with knowledge of the past, right? Is it can't know things it doesn't know. And if you're only predicting off your memory, then you're in trouble a little bit with that, with what you're talking about.
Yeah. And we succumb to it as much as the machines are limited by it. But we can get out of that mode, and it looks like we might be able to build computational algorithms in different ways that aren't so based on the past, right? If we understand more of the the rich, seemingly to us unpredictable computational landscape that's out there, but which machines could actually harness.
Yeah. No, I did a paper on big data, and in psychology, they use pretty much the general linear model for like 95% of everything. And all I did is, because the computer can do it so much faster, just applied like 20 models, and some of them were decision trees, and you can run 100 of them instead of just like one. And then some tolerate errors hugely, and that like tolerance for wrongness increases its ability to see things. And so it's really hard to articulate why all the weird ways are better than the most powerful way, like the comfortable old-fashioned most. But it was really fun to do, and just in learning all those little things, like, oh, I should tolerate outliers more instead of saying it's a failure. Because if I widen my like net of prediction, then I'm going to get more truth in tolerating that in a different way than I would. So yeah, it's so interesting. The potential of these things. Yeah, if they could start to cure nihilism for someone to go like, hey, you need a walk. Like there was a robot movie where this robot monitored this old man and kept trying to get him to like do things to battle his diabetes and his senility and stuff. He's like, "Ah, you're tricking me, robot. I'm caught on to you," because he was like a thief, so he knew how to think about sneakiness better than most, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. So Thumos. So
Thumos, yeah.
Yeah,
What's
you said
going
you
on?
had thought about it a lot, and that's exciting.
Yeah, I dug up some old notes and had to look over them to figure out what it was that I thought. And the thing that really stood out to me was that I'd been thinking it around like the human drive to experience and express dysregulatory intensities. So when I'm thinking like in the Socratic approach with reason and appetite and spirit, or however we want to translate those things, right? You've got reason as a sort of regulatory set of non-intensities, and you've got appetite as like regulatory intensities, and then you've got thumos as dysregulatory intensities. So the appetites, the things we have in common with the animals, are trying to keep us in a kind of homeostasis, right? So that what I want to do is eat and drink and work and have sex appropriately and at the right tempo to keep me functioning as whatever creature I am that I've adapted to being. And the thumos is always threatening that. It's always saying, hey, why don't I come up with a reason to move myself towards a far from equilibrium condition in which things might radically change. So there's a whole set of emotional drives and a whole set of skills to get into that state. It can be gotten into like in a positive or negative way. Like I could go, all right, fuck it, I'm going to push my meditation to the point where something really happens. And I mean, there's going to be a risk of reorganization there. Or I could be like, well, I'm just going to start breaking into people's homes and violating cultural taboos or something like that. So there's positive and negative versions. And we learn from our cultural moments, and the sociocognitive operating system and the technology, whatever's available socially, teaches us what the forms for expressing thumos are and what the consequences might be. But fundamentally, it's trying to take us to the limit condition of our normal regulation, is how I've been thinking about it.
And so it's breaking free of the patterns of like the intellect and of the appetites. Is that its primary function? Or
well, I would see that relationship I would see a little bit differently. Like reason has to figure out how to coordinate the impulses that are behaviorally regulatory and the impulses that are behaviorally dysregulatory or reorganizational in nature.
Okay.
You don't want too much of either one of them, and you want to figure out how they apply in different contexts. And it will be in different contexts, right? If you're in a warrior tribe in ancient Athens, then it might be, hey, let's go fight the Persians. But you might grow up in a completely different culture where it's, hey, let's challenge ourselves to embody dignity and goodness better, or something like that, right?
So it's like a frame breaker.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And so in like a really stable, healthy environment, it might not even have a big role, or it might just be more of like an exploratory role, or like,
yeah, well, I think it would be safer and more exploratory under good conditions.
Okay.
In Lindbergh's article, where he focuses on like fuck it, right? The thing about fuck it is, what are you saying fuck it to? You're saying fuck it to a set of like a regulatory echelon in yourself. You're going to challenge that limit condition, but that limit condition could be challenged under very bad conditions where fuck it means I'm just going to go and do something. I'm going to shoot up a school.
Right.
Or fuck it means, you know what? I'm actually going to start doing that yoga I promised myself I would do.
Right.
And then I'll feel better, and my society embraces that one, but I'll be a different person than I am right now. The regulatory limit will be pushed past.
And then how does the intellect react to that? Because I can see the appetites not having much of a say once it starts happening, or they'll just go, I'm hungry, or I'm horny, or I'm whatever. But how would the intellect go like, oh, that's scary, or
well, I mean, ideally, when Socrates is talking, he's talking about reason and the intellect from the philosopher's point of view. So he's thinking about how do I use intention and metacognitive framing to achieve a better harmony between these functions.
Okay, so it's more
example of what I mean. That's in the justice section of the Republic.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
He's making a general point about how systems operate together to produce like surplus coherence effects. So the reason is supposed to be doing that in his model. It's supposed to be negotiating between those two kinds of prompts to get generalized well-being and satisfactory outcomes that are plugged into what's good for the local social frame as well. But I think one of the things that intellect has to do is stretch it over different time frames, because a lot of thumos is context dependent, right? Like, I don't know if you've got kids, but how a kid's appetites feel before going to do something, you as the reasoning parent, you have to weigh that out compared to what you think they'll be like when they're in the circumstance. Like, I don't want to go to that birthday party. I'm like, okay, that's what your system is telling you now as a form of self-regulation in the moment. But I'm pretty sure, having observed you, that once you're there, you're going to get turned on competitively or collaboratively and want to show off, want to engage, want to do these thumos activities, right? And you can't see that within your little adaptive short time window. So one of the things the intellect has to do is calculate context dependent thumos, right? Or like, you check how much thumos you feel in the moment. How spirited am I? How turned on am I? Right? That's one thing. Every animal can kind of do that. But if you go like, well, what activities should I engage in so that I have thumos later? That's something that reason has to play a role in, right? If you got to milk the go juice so that you have some go juice later, but your immediate circumstance doesn't tell you that. It just tells you whether you have it or not.
So like picking your battles, like the reason needs to pick the battles and the thumos fights the battles.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, reason can, like in the Socratic model, reason is trying to help get satisfied appetites and thumotic edification. Right. And so, like, how do you maximize that? But how do you maximize that over time and over different conditions? Because the animal appetites won't necessarily help thumos function maximally under many conditions. Reason has to intervene and figure out how to balance those in these different scales of engagement.
And so, like, when people just completely shut their thumos down through their intellect, I guess, or through the intellect collaborating with the appetites or something, how would that look? And then what would undo that? Like, let's say, or is that even possible?
Well, I think like there's a real biosocial aspect to this, which is like socially, you're getting on the one hand a set of impressions about where you could legitimately express thumos and get the intensities of reformatting experience that are available, and then how other people might respond to that. And you're also getting a background mood about how likely should we be, how primed should we be psychologically to have these experiences and push ourselves toward them, right? So if you're in one society, it's like, hey, get ready. We're always ready to try something. In another society, we're like, okay, the managers of society who are profiting from it have got this. Why don't you just stay in your spot? You're getting a different message. So that's on the social side. But the biological side, I think of it as like the Wilhelm Reich side, right? You have to have mobility. You have to be able to breathe. If you can't circulate like stimulation currents among your organs, then you can't go into a thumos mode very well.
Right. So if someone's doing that, if they're dysregulated in that way, like they're just not circulating or not attending, what would be like maybe some practices or some like interpersonal practices that could activate it without over activating it? Like someone that hasn't eaten in 10 days just gorges themselves, like, oh, I'm in such pain now. I thought I was hungry, but oh, this hurts. Like, do you have any thoughts on anything?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of different ways to go at it. I mean, one is having more open discussion about it, like people telling each other how they get into these modes and what was successful or not, so that we build collaborative wisdom on that. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it seems so simple.
And putting it forward, like, and part of that conversation just makes it sound good. You remember, like, oh yeah, I do like something about that. Maybe we should foreground the form of eros that leads us to those things more often. I think that the form of metacognitive reasoning in which you balance out circumstances and pressures and values is important, because, like you're saying, you can starve and then gorge, but that's not optimal. What you want, what is optimal is fasting a little so that your thirst for the food is built up, so that when you do eat the appropriate amount, it tastes even better than if you'd been eating regular meals, right? So there's a way of interpreting ascetic practice as pro-thumos or anti-thumos. Like ascetic practice could be like, I could be celibate because I'm sex negative, or I could be celibate because I'm preparing for an occult solstice sex ritual or something like that. And I know that it takes a week for me to get to my maximum turn on potential or something.
Right. Oh, that's so smart. Yeah, because you're not denying, you're temporarily denying so that you can like overcome a barrier. Like it's like a strategic, like on graph theory, when you hit a local maximum or minimum, you have to go in like counterintuitive ways to actually continue growing or get better again if you're actually not in a good place.
Yeah,
so you're saying like, okay, well,
to escape the local maxima and see how far up you can go.
Right.
You have to undertake certain seemingly counterintuitive practices. But a lot of that's based on like this kind of reciprocal adjustment kind of thing, right? You're like, what's too much and what's too little, that kind of thinking. If you don't bring that into thumos, then you get a very clunky kind of brute force thumos that probably fails as much as it succeeds.
No, I'm thinking about like, you ever heard of the Whole30 diet?
No.
It's like a hard reset that people like quit virtually every type of food, and you'll like talk to them and they'll get like itchy scalps and all sorts of negative reactions. But that's temporary, and then you reintroduce things and then you can actually learn from the reset what was causing the problem or what was actually really good. Like, oh, I didn't realize that was so good, do more of that. And so it's interesting how it might be so counterintuitive.
And then the other one, like I mentioned, Reich. So somatic therapy is a component of this to some degree, right? Like if you can't take full, easy, deep breaths, then how are you going to pump up the system, right? So that if you have muscle armoring or some kind of constriction pattern, or you're just a neurological habit of breathing wrong, that's got to be corrected. If you can't move your body fluidly and things like that, or just your health, right? Maybe you're not getting enough potassium to pull off thumos or whatever it takes. General physical health things and motility and energization experiences. I mean, that's a great precondition.
Somatic. So a lot of like somatic health and somatic reconnection. And then the energy is just there, so it'll flow better by virtue of you removing the barriers.
I mean, there's something that thumos and inspiration, taken as a more philosophical concept, have in common, right? You're like, all right then.
Well, that's what I think is missing, right? There's so many people that are kind of like just don't know what to do, don't know how to express themselves, and they like kind of become super introverts or just shut down, and like they're so disconnected from healthy somatic expression that it's interesting to see the need of the body in such like a IQ rewarding culture that loves giving the smart people a lot of technical things to do, and they're like, oh, it's so fun to skateboard again. Like, I finally am rich enough to have enough free time to go bicycling again. And you see people like, why didn't you just bicycle to begin with? And they're like, oh, that's too easy. And the moral of the Mexican fisherman and the American guy that's like, oh, I'm gonna earn $5 million and then retire one day. And the Mexican guy's like, what? Why would you just do that? We do that every day. We go to the beach. It's beautiful. So maybe like too much long-term planning can also sabotage thumos, would you think?
Sure. And that comes into the social side in terms of what we can be told things that presumably like hack the thumos, right? You're like, imagine how good it's going to feel after you spend 36 hours trying to solve this piece of coding. You're like, well, it will, but at the same time, that process might be a process in which you're shutting down a lot of the complex organic functions that our ancestors would have relied upon to engage in thumos activity.
Yeah, so that's great. So that brings up the kind of counterpoint of how do we keep thumos on and keep looking far enough down the road? Like, we want that good code, but we don't want it to like, in this weak little body. He's like, aha, we've conquered death, and we're all like anorexic looking or something.
Yeah, well, again, I think a big part of that is just people having a more freely circulating conversation around what they do and what's worked, right? Because you might want to go down this tunnel, right? And like going to war is you're going down a Thumos tunnel, and you're risking a lot of other values, but you should at least have a good visceral sense of what the other Thumos modes are that are available to these kinds of bodies and in this kind of social context, right? So if we have that conversation more, then that person working on that piece of code, if they're at least aware of how good it might feel to eat right or exercise or go down the tunnel of a strange psychedelic experience, or right, as they've got a sense of the more distributed panoply of their Thumos options, they're probably more likely to be able to regulate their experience of going down one tunnel. Then obviously if the physiology is better. What else? There's a certain kind of there's a positive and negative version of how we treat the body. Like one is intentional. So you're like, all right, well, move differently, stand up straight, put out your chest, take an inspiring breath. That's all something that's available to direct intentional control of the body. But there's also this down-going part where like your energies can't come back up freely if it hasn't gone all the way down. Like I think that's in Nietzsche, but it's also
so being really uncomfortable, like getting comfortable with uncomfortableness again.
Yeah, and with things like grief is another thing like that, right? Like if grief comes, it's already come, and you can either go all the way down and then it can come back up. But if you won't go all the way down, then it's stuck there and you don't come all the way back up either.
Okay.
In traditional Chinese medicine, the thymus is called the heart protector.
Yeah.
So thymus and thumos, right? The heart protector's job is to prevent you from experiencing what your heart is experiencing, right? And that sometimes has temporary utility. You're in the wrong circumstance to really laugh or really cry or something like that. But ultimately, you have to relax. If you go to get the acupuncture needles on that area, they'll relax out the thymus, and then your heart will be exposed to whatever it's been trying to process.
Okay.
You're going to get thumos activation as a process of opening that up, going all the way into what seems like a fall, what seems like a failure, and then coming back out into the healthy mode of being ready to engage both in appetite and in thumos.
Okay, great. Okay, wow.
And that's similar with the breathing thing too. You could take a deeper breath, which is great. But if you go to somatic bodywork therapists, a lot of the time we'll have regularly put like a stack of books on your chest. Right? And you have to breathe, and there's more weight pushing down on your lungs. And you have to like feel that and let yourself have those sensations, and then also push back a little more. So there's this sense of collapse and rebound that I think is to the organism's thumos.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because it's this negative feedback loop. And so just letting it exert itself through these things that it's been avoiding, or that you've been avoiding. That's interesting. So like just a good cry that resets you, or even if you don't like funny movies, going and laughing for an hour and you're like, oh wow, I'm back online. Or music, a lot of people don't listen to music as adults, but they loved it as kids, and then you'll see like someone go like, oh, I reconnected to music and I'm different now. So these kind of like feeling ways,
and those are all very nice, like very socially acceptable in the current model.
Okay, yeah, let's get dark. Yeah, go ahead.
You could also say that same kind of thing is happening with warrior goes to stand against an overwhelming force, right? There's a reason we wouldn't normally do that, is because death and pain, right? But he's somehow taken that into account. He's like, all right, well, fuck it, this could be awful. I'm probably going to die here, right? So he's gone down with it so that he can then stand up with it.
So yeah, that's Judge Han talks about rage that way in his little bits on Thumos, and how we've gotten rid of our capacity for rage, and how powerful rage and boredom both are as salience like mirrors, and how necessary feeling boredom is, because then it goes, oh, break this shit up, get the fuck out of here. Whereas if you don't experience it fully, you stay numb and stay like on course in that little tunnel that you're talking about. So are there other like negative affect states, or maybe even good examples of people that are going in that like less socially acceptable direction?
Well, I think people who take taboo violating risks are doing something similar, and that's often at the expense of what is socially normative in any given context, right? Like you see adolescents doing this a lot, which they're gonna, I mean, first of all, adolescents are like, hey, let's go watch a movie where a bunch of naked people get hacked up by a killer or whatever it is, right?
Right.
But they're wanting to go into these negative things in order to produce arousal conditions in themselves. But for the same reason, they might try to steal a car or trespass or try to challenge these normal social boundary things. And right, that's part of the system that's causing their current homeostasis, and they're suffering from that, and they're building up this charge, which is like, hey, can we violate the homeostatic symbolic thresholds? And sometimes that's very acceptable to society, and sometimes it's not acceptable to society. And so part of the social analog to the individual philosopher's reason is a society that figures out how to elicit thumos, but to channel it in ways that serve the current social order. Otherwise, you either suppress it or it comes up and it doesn't serve the social order.
Right. So what's an example of a society doing it well, maybe?
Well, I mean, societies that have a certain, historically, an indulgence for heroism, right? Where it's really useful to have people who are going to go over and fight another nation or another race or something like that, or a village society where the young men in particular, because there's a certain male-female thing about thumos. It's very often discussed as manliness.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in the female version too, for sure.
Yeah. So, but I think there's a reason why the masculine discourse predominates. It's because it's more obvious. And historically, we're like, okay, we need somebody to go out and fight bears or fight cougars or fight, somebody.
Okay, so thumos is like as the destructive, creative destruction against problems that are bothering your tribe.
Yeah,
is a healthy channel potentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I remember the Jungian Robert Johnson, I think, he was saying like a priestess, like a Catholic woman, came up and said, why don't you have any of this good imaginal stuff for women? He's like, because you would go into graveyards and do kooky crazy things with it, and I don't know how to deal with that, or something like that. So what is like the female version of thumos that maybe goes wrong or could be channeled in a good way?
Yeah. Well, the risk of reproducing is a interesting challenge that, sometimes it comes upon you unawares historically in tribes, but where it becomes a more deliberate choice, that's a choice where you're like, okay, you've got to build up something in yourself to be like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change my life, totally be destabilized, turn myself inside out, right? Generate a whole new social order. Now I'm going to be a mother rather than the person I am, right? So again, thumos is directed to these excessive conditions that broach a limit and cause reorganization.
Wow. So like a radical transformation. You could prepare intelligently for this radical transformation where you're consumed, your identity, your old identity is consumed in the process. Yeah. And it might even be like one directional, like a system dynamic. You're just like, nope, we can't return to that once we've gone.
Exactly. Right. And that's the risk I think that all thumos has in common, although sometimes it's very subtle and very vague, but other times it's very direct, right? If you're going to have a child, or if you're going to be married off to somebody in another village, or if you're going to go to war, or if you're going to try to climb Mount Everest, these may be conditions in which there is no return.
Right. So it's like a wife supports her husband going to war. She's risking, if they lose, she's going to be someone else's wife. Her kids are going to be gone as slaves or killed. So it's not even like she's really that passive when she's supporting this thumotic decision to go break everything up. There's big reward, but like there's even in the support of it a huge risk behind the
Yeah, I think
failure.
if we wanted to get a better map of female Thumos,
Yeah.
we need at least two things. One is a better appreciation of the kinds of anxieties and pressures that the women are under, which haven't always been in the discourse. And the
Okay.
other one is we need to think of a lot of things that we normally imagine as passive as actually being active participation in
That's
something.
what I was trying to do. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because even if I'm not, say we're married and you're the warrior, I still have influence on you because I'm saying like, don't do that, and you respect me and you listen. Or I'm saying, no, go do that. So there is even in the decision making, or like, oh, can we afford that for our son? Or like the things that you're not thinking about that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. And oh yeah, you're right. There's just a huge lack of honest philosophy that women are sharing, or that is heard by the group that is the men or whatever.
Yeah, no, and
It's-
there's some social dynamics there, like, the female discourse hasn't come forward as much, and the men have a sort of self-satisfied, self-congratulatory discourse as if they're the main agent in history. But there's also some differences in biological and neurological conditions that make the manliness thing seem like the center of the Thumos discourse, right? Because the men are it's very overt, it's very obvious to everyone when you're sending someone off to war. And there's a certain well, we know that the female tendency for trait neuroticism is higher, which means they're going to second guess a lot of those choices, and their brains are also tracking more variables than the male brain, which means they're going to be a little bit more cautious. And the male brain is going to click off at a certain point and go, well, basically, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop considering things now. Right. And that makes you more likely to go and do risky things. So it becomes more obvious that the men are going to go and do that because the women have more compensating and cautious things to take into account.
Yeah. So when they act with Thumos, it's probably actually pays off more reliably less bad because they've accounted for more of the bad before
they
deciding.
might do it less often and less dangerously and less obviously, but they might also succeed at it more often because they've taken more things into account.
Yeah. No, male and female suicide, women try it less.
Yeah.
They don't even get to the point to where they could fail, and men will just do it and die. And so that's suicide seems thumatic in the bad sense, and go, oh, life's so bad, I'm gonna do something. And whereas a woman would go like, oh, I just hurt myself and quietly all day or something, but not die, not like lose their
I'll
life.
just emotionally kill myself slowly over time.
Oh, or it might be happening in the invisible emotional psychological space of their personality. Oh,
so that's what we don't know, is like how much of the information is hidden in like the concealed non-verbal, non-social arena space.
Ooh, so interesting. So this is great. This is so have you seen women that are good at Thumos and maybe like are a little more overt? Because I know like 1 out of a million women are less secretive about these things.
Well, you see them around, like over the course of our lifetime, the sudden appearance of good female comedians.
Ooh,
right? That's been an interesting thing, right? Like you don't get a Sarah Silverman without Thumos.
No. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. She's perfect, right? Yeah, she's. And maybe the social part makes it harder for women to express that, because being dirty as a woman is harder to do, or being vulgar or disgusting. Whereas a man, which are like maybe thumatic parts of like, okay, I can be a gross, decisive man, but I can't do that as a woman easily.
There's a seriousness maybe statistically in the female brain, because she's taking these things into account and she's looking after the children, right? Very serious tasks. Whereas there's a kind of flippancy sometimes, a casualness, which is partly real and partly performed in the males. And I see this in politicians, like somebody who's running for president who's female has to be able to channel aggression in order to demonstrate to the rest of the tribe that she's going to be the warrior on our behalf. But if she takes it too seriously, right? If she's explaining what she's really concerned and really angry about, it might come across as shrill and brittle and unpalatable. Whereas the male public leader is trying to demonstrate how relaxed he is about aggression, how casually he's going to challenge another country, and that he's having a good time with it.
Right. Like Hillary Clinton would say, like, I'm perceived as a bitch. That's what keeps happening. Or Sarah Palin in the US. And whereas like that'd be like it's almost like John Vervaeke when he would talk about how sensibility transcendences are the strength that is the weakness. It's like, oh, I want a male that does that, but not a female. So when the same trait gets exposed in a slightly different appearance, it's perceived differently as part of a bigger package that you're trying to mold the. Oh, that's so interesting. And then again, like you're saying, so this just like letting it out in the open on both ends or on all ends allows it to be examined for what it is better and to be explored more openly. And then that gives just more options and more truth to be able to make better decisions. Are there any like courage comes up a lot, or mercy, I think, as a precursor to good courage. Equanimity, are there other like virtues that are thumos dominant?
Equanimity is an interesting one because, like, if you're looking at meditation practice, sometimes the same practice might be described as pursuing a tranquility and equanimity, a kind of balanced homeostatic state where you're just comfortable with whatever you're embedded in. And then the same practice could be described in another way as building something up, as building up a depth, as building up a power, an intensity, a consciousness, which might be able to then challenge the circumstance that you're embedded in. So I think there are critiques from some. I don't know how familiar you are with the work of like Bard and Soderquist.
I was thinking of Bard. Yeah.
So in their friend, like they have a mortitudinal, libidinal distinction where like most people and most beings through their ideals, because it's very Nietzschean, are actually pursuing some kind of self-limitation. They're just trying to readapt themselves to the neutralized circumstance that they happen to be in.
Okay, it's kind of cowardice,
Yeah, so in that sense, that they would critique those sorts of spiritual and meditative practices and be in favor of spiritual meditative practices that exert more thumos, which is I'm doing it to get more of something. I'm doing it to be different. I'm doing it to go beyond myself. And so I think equanimity would have a negative or suspicious flavor in the mind of a Bard and Soderquist.
Well, the reason I brought that up is because if your form of justice isn't fair to everybody, it tends to be fair to you at the cost of everybody.
Yeah.
So like in the dialogues, they kind of bring that up, and the Socrates wants to bring the bad guys into the good light and stuff. So that's the kind of equanimity, not like a cowardly, placating kind of a posture, but like okay, well, I have the choice of being a tyrant or being just, and I need to go towards the just side and have a big fun party where everyone wins, rather than like
cultivationist ethos, which a charitable reading of Socrates and a charitable reading of Nietzsche both have this, right? Where Nietzsche talks about how the reproductive drive in animals gets refined into the human experience of love, and what it might look like if we equally spiritualized all the other seemingly animalistic tendencies that we have. Like he asks what the spiritualized version of cruelty looks like and things like that. So there's a sense in which in both of their thinking, there's no particular set of qualities that's off limits. Each one is a starting place, but it's a starting place to weave them together into some kind of harmonized whole, which then spills over itself, becomes transcendently radiant in various ways.
Okay, so
which I think is what Socrates is getting at in that whole section, because he's comparing the three souls to the three castes in society.
Yeah,
and he's like, look, it's just not in like the Christian sentimental moral sense, but in the sort of high pagan sense. Justice is arranging these things together in a way that the whole thing becomes stronger and transcendently radiant and overflowing with its own meaningfulness.
No, that's why I'm so interested in the repression aspect and how the intellect can kind of repress this pretty hard. And then so are all like impulses, drives, different facets of our like really power, like the Greek gods, right? Like you want to find ways to make them spiritual, make Mars serve the good, or make like the trickster archetype serve the good. Is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, well, that's a part of it. I had a conversation with Greg Henriquez recently about self-esteem, social influence, and relational value.
Okay.
And one of the things I said partway through that was the thing we often call the will is something like intrapsychic social influence. Is like, how do systems within us exert influence on other systems within us?
Right.
Like if I can make myself do a thing, then I have will. But it's really like a kind of social influence between the community of the internal agents.
Mm-hmm.
And a thing that's necessary in that is aggression, right? Because each of these internal systems, like even if we just imagine them as like associative mimetic chains or something, like I have an intellectual part of me and it hears an idea and it goes down the associated idea chain. And I have an emotional part of me and it feels an emotion and it just goes to everything else that causes that emotion. So I have these chains and they each have a certain efficiency. Like memes are always trying to flow more efficiently and kind of how there's a surface tension that protects this efficient flowing. And if you wanted to integrate these systems to create a greater harmony, you would have to violate what they each normally wish to do, right? So that's an aggressive move, and it's an abnormal move. It's an unnecessary move, right? I can just, my mind and heart and body and consciousness, they can just run normally. However, whether that's good or bad for me, they just run automatically. And if I decide, no, I don't like that, I want them to either change or I want them to get together.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say to each of them, you don't get to be sovereign anymore. Right? I want to know how this thought feels. I want to know what's reasonable about that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I want to decide what my body's going to do and not just have it do whatever it does. So now I'm in like a combatant in this situation. And I might as well be going off to war because I'm going to have to engage in a real struggle. So I have to have some extra feeling of internal incentive. I go, fuck it. You know what? I don't care what my thoughts want to do. I'm going to make them do this. I'm going to make them get along with my emotions, whether they want to or not.
Is that part of your like excess resource value model?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Have you published on that? Like, where does someone, like, aside of just listening to 100 hours of you, where does someone get like a clear picture of that?
I mean, I have written document versions of it around, although I don't focus on them as much as I used to since I'm doing so much of this.
Sure. No. I'm intrigued by the model and it seems very promising. And it seems like a very, just from an economic standpoint of like, okay, you can go up and down the curve, or you can like build a way to bust up the curve entirely so you can slide on a better curve or a different curve, something like that. And it's just, I'd love to, again, like how to understand it and then how to apply it.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Well, I think, if we look at spirituality as being like that, as sort of the generation of this excess coherence condition, then that's one useful version of harnessing Thumos, right? Because you could aim Thumos at a bunch of different excessive states.
Yeah.
But if you aim Thumos at that kind of excessive state where it's excessive because of its integrated harmony, then you get a bunch of classically spiritual positive effects, right? General beingness and contentment and organization, and you seem nicer to people, all that kind of stuff.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting.
I'm also thinking of Jesus does some things around this.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, tell me about.
Going to bring the serpent and the dove have to cooperate in Jesus, right? So there's a sense in which you have to have two different a function that might be asp or adder, like the part of you that might strike and the part of you that might be very charitable and merciful. Those are supposed to be coordinated in that model. Another thing about Jesus that often doesn't come up is
I love this,
the love thy enemies thing, right? So the disciples say, well, why should we love our enemies? And he says to them, if you just love the normal people that you love, then how are you any better than anyone else?
Right. You're a hypocrite.
Right? So he's calling you to Christian virtue as a form of competitive superiority, as a Thumos move, right?
It's funny that you frame it. Oh, that's great. He's like, look, you cowards, if you want to win this war, you gotta love those enemies. Oh, this is great. You'd be a great little league coach. This is fantastic. I know you have to go, so we can wrap up. I think this gave me a lot to think about, and I'll rewatch this and maybe follow up Do you have like what's a good place for me to learn about that model, like your main model?
I would have to think about that and send you something.
Yeah, could you just send me something, the
Sure,
next month
absolutely.
or whatever?
I'll see what I can find.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to talking to you on Wednesday, and thanks again so much for talking.
Yeah, I'll probably just be repeating myself, but
No, you have to follow the logo. So I'm sure hopefully something new will occur within or between what's happening.
Yeah. All right. See you soon, Rep.
All right. Take care, Layman. Thanks again.
I think he wants a challenge.
Hercules' fists have been dipped in the blood of the Hydra! Lethal to anyone but him! Watch!